But I think we have to really emphasize a fundamental point that affects all of us. The peaceful time of international navigation are over. We no longer have a situation where shipping is, let's say, happening in a peaceful, neutral space.
After a month of war, the Strait of Hormuz remains at the center of global attention. Commercial vessels continue to come under attack, naval mines remain a concern, confidence in safe navigation remains fragile. And the question is no longer just whether ships can pass through one of the world's most important waterways, but under whose conditions. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Moritz Brake, Senior Fellow at the Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies, and founder and CEO of Nexmaris. A conversation about the Strait of Hormuz, maritime security, and the future of global trade. Welcome to Focus Nahost. My name is Josephine Herrmann. The Strait of Hormuz links the Persian Gulf with global markets and is one of the world's most important energy hubs. During the Iran war that broke out at the end of February, shipping traffic came to a virtual standstill due to the blockades imposed by the US and Iran. Its partial reopening has led to a slump in oil prices. Today, the situation remains highly volatile. Attacks on commercial vessels continue, naval mines remain a concern, and despite ongoing diplomatic efforts, uncertainty continues to shape one of the world's most strategically important waterways. But the bigger questions begin there. Has the crisis fundamentally changed the Strait of Hormuz? Is the debate no longer about whether ships can pass through, but about who gets to control the conditions under which they do? What does this crisis tell us about maritime security, global trade, and the future of international order? My guest today is Dr. Moritz Brake. He is Senior Fellow at the Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies at the University of Bonn in Germany, and founder and CEO of Nexmaris, a consultancy specializing in maritime resilience and security. He is also a reserve officer in the German Navy. Dr. Brake holds a PhD in war studies from King's College and took part in the United Nations missions UNIFIL in the Eastern Mediterranean and the European Union's anti-piracy mission Atalanta in the Horn of Africa. A conversation about the Strait of Hormuz, maritime security, and the question of what comes next. Dr. Brake, for decades, the Strait of Hormuz has been regarded as one of the world's most important maritime choke points. But after months of war, attacks on commercial shipping, a fragile US-Iran framework agreement, and renewed military escalation, has the Strait of Hormuz entered a fundamentally new phase?
I think the world has entered a fundamentally new phase in which vulnerabilities like the Strait of Hormuz are being increasingly used as points of political leverage, of elements of great power competition, and geopolitics has returned to the center of attention of international politics, in the sense of that certain geographical choke points or also certain resource supplies that are now being that can now be leveraged to exert power over others and strengthen the own position and even militarized. So this is exactly what we're seeing with Hormuz. Iran is using this to put pressure on the international society by blockading critical elements of international trade, critical resource supplies, but also, especially in the region, against its neighbors in the Persian Gulf.
When people think about the Strait of Hormuz, they often ask whether it is open or closed. Iran insists that commercial vessels should use routes improved by Tehran, while Washington argues that the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway. Is the conflict less about closing the strait and more about controlling it?
Yeah, it's definitely about control. It goes back to the point of exerting political leverage, and so Iran claims control over the Strait of Hormuz, and imposes a regime where it calls for, or where it forces vessels transiting the strait to pay money to the regime in Tehran, and also leaves the decision whether vessels can transit at all with the Revolutionary Guards. So it's not a typical traffic toll that's being levied, for example, in the Suez Canal or in the Panama Canal, which also helps to maintain those man-made waterways. But in this case, it's simply extortion money that Iran forces out of international shipping, and does that in order not to shoot at vessels. So you're paying not to be shot at. You're not paying for a service to assist you in navigation.
Iran demonstrated that it was capable of disrupting one of the world's most important shipping lanes, as you just mentioned. But after reopening the Strait of Hormuz, Tehran now appears to be pursuing something different, I would say. Not necessarily preventing navigation altogether, but shaping the conditions under which navigation takes place. Would you say Iran shifted from using the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon of disruption to using it as a tool of political leverage?
I think it is something that happened on the go. I don't think it was a fully developed strategy from the beginning, but what began as a major shock, as a complete disruption, Tehran then discovered that this can be maintained, that neither United States, nor the United States in combination with Israel, or pressure from the international society are able to take away control over the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. So now that this is established, in this moment of shock, of control, of awing the neighborhood and also parts of international society, of the global economy, into accepting or into seeing that Iran can stop traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, now they're trying to transform this into a durable regime of control over the straits. And I think this is highly dangerous. This feeds a system of control over the straits, which then leads to more power accumulated in the hands of Iran, which in turn can then be used to exert more power over the Strait of Iran and also the entire region. Everything that was a problem with Iran before the war will now get worse with control over the straits. And I think the two issues that are now part of the negotiations, which I think are very, very fraught with a high risk for failure, because the fundamental positions are just so different and irreconcilable between the United States and also European interest, global interest, international interest, and that what Iran wants to establish here, is that Iran has striven for a nuclear weapon for a very long time, and also now has control over the Strait of Hormuz. And I think the main difference here is Iran already has control over the Strait of Hormuz and thereby can exert direct power, whereas nuclear weapons are still over the horizon. Iran does not yet possess them. But both issues are very difficult to talk out of control of Iran. What is there that international society can bring to bear to pressurize the regime in Tehran to let go of the Strait of Hormuz and to let go of the plan to strive for a nuclear weapon? We've tried, the Americans have tried to exert military power to force the regime to let go, and this hasn't worked. Clearly, hasn't worked. And what else is there as a threat scenario? And everything else now that tries to buy acquiescence, to buy compliance with whatever we want Iran to do, can always only lead to the price rising in the future. Since there is no threat scenario in the offing where non-compliance can be punished, rewarding compliance will make the whole deal costlier and costlier and place more power, more money, more influence in the hands of Iran.
Well, you just mentioned that negotiations are taking place, and despite the renewed efforts to restart negotiations, the next is going to happen in Doha, I think tomorrow on Tuesday. We continue to see attacks on commercial shipping, renewed U.S. strikes, and Iranian retaliation. Would you say that suggests that restoring stability in the Strait of Hormuz is likely to be a much longer process than reaching a political agreement?
I think when we're talking about restoring peace and stability in the Strait of Hormuz, we are trying to get back to a state of affairs that we had before the war. And international shipping for it to flow freely, needs reliable peace. You can't have a residual risk of being shot at or running into a mine for merchant ships to still transit freely as they used to before the war. And this situation clearly hasn't returned, and I think is not likely to return. There's always going to be a residual risk that that confrontation will reignite, that Iran will use attacks on merchant vessels to establish and enforce its ambition to control the straits.
You just mentioned the mines. The International Maritime Organization, IMO, said their traditional traffic separation scheme cannot yet be used because parts of the strait need to be cleared. But how serious is the mine threat really? And could it affect commercial shipping longer than the fighting itself, longer after the fighting itself has stopped?
Well, it's a very dangerous situation for shipping. The moment Iran said that it mined the strait, a merchant vessel's master, a captain, will have to accept this as fact. The risk is just too high because a mine hit could mean the loss of a vessel, means tremendous risk to the crew, and this is the first and foremost mission of any captain of any merchant vessel, to protect the lives of their crew. So passing through an area that one state claims has been mined is too risky for a merchant vessel to attempt. And on top of these claims of the regime in Tehran, we have reports of the United States Navy that they have found mines in the Strait of Hormuz. We've also had this as part of a statement of the U.S. president in the past week, that he referred to a number of mines that still need to be cleared. And then there came this reference that this was supposed to be a matter of a few days or weeks to clear this. And I think this is something we need to call into question, because if there are mines, either the regime in Tehran is compliant with a peace solution and then should be able to clear those mines quickly, or at least give the location of these mines for merchant vessels to then evade them, and an international mission, for example, to clear those mines. But at the moment, we don't see this cooperation from Iran. We don't see this possibility to quickly remove any mines that might be there or might not be there to make traffic flow again. It seems to be servicing the goals of Iran to have the mine threat there, and Iran is not interested in removing it, either in the message or in the physical substance on the scene.
But what do we know about the mines, really? Like, do we have an idea where they are located and how many might be out there?
Well, based on the claims of Iran, mines are basically all over the old area of the traffic separation scheme, of the old routes that merchant vessels used to take, all the way down to the waters of Oman. So, in essence, only leaving the passage through the Iran-announced new separation scheme or traffic scheme, which passes close to the coast of Iran. And so we have seen, though, over the past weeks, passages of merchant vessels on the southbound route close to the coast of Oman, partially protected by the United States Navy, and with non-disclosed, publicly disclosed numbers of vessels transiting. But some estimates go up to almost half of the pre-war traffic volume that we have been seeing over the past days. But I think with renewed attacks on merchant vessels, these numbers will clearly be dwindling again. And it's not attractive for merchant vessels, for shipping companies, to make deals with the regime in Tehran. We have seen merchant vessels that have been shot at despite having made deals with the Revolutionary Guards. And it clearly feeds the monster that holds us by the throat. If you pay the regime to transit, the Strait of Hormuz, the money ends up in the hands of those that then build up more power to solidify their regime of control.
Just coming back to the fact, like, how do these mines work? How can I imagine that? Are they underground? Are they just below the surface? How does this actually work?
There are different mines available in terms of technology to Iran. If you think about mines at sea, you may have this image, in your mind from the First World War or the World Wars in general, where mines on chains anchored to the ground just below the surface, so they could strike the hull, or a hull of a passing ship could touch these mines and then detonate them. They have these like hedgehogs, like pins sticking out that react to contact by a vessel. and then ignite the explosive charge in the mine. These very simple dumb mines have the advantage of staying in place typically, of only reacting to contact, and have the disadvantage of being relatively easy to make, relatively easy to disperse, and in the worst case, their chains being severed perhaps, or not even being used in the first place, so they might be drifting and spreading the risk over a larger area. This is something we've seen in the Gulf Wars in the past, that these simple types of mines started floating and drifting and becoming a risk to shipping broader in a much wider area than where they were originally deployed, maybe even with the intention of those that deployed them to create this sort of a much more or much less controllable threat scenario. And then you have more modern mines, smarter mines that are not made of metal, perhaps harder to detect. They can be activated from afar with a signal, perhaps, or even detonated intentionally from afar. They are mines with counters that will not explode on the first vessel that passes over them, but maybe on the 7th or 11th or whatever. So you have this situation where you can never be sure that there are no mines. They are harder to detect, and they will not explode the moment you pass them. Then there are mines that only detonate when a certain type of vessel, maybe even a very specific vessel, passes them. When you can use hydroacoustic signatures of vessels, the sounds they make in the water, to target one specific one, let's say an aircraft carrier or another type of warship, or a type of merchant vessel that you would like to hit, or magnetic signatures of specific types of vessels. So mines can become, or on the upper end of the scale, can be very sophisticated and hard to find. And on the other end, they're still very dangerous.
You already mentioned Oman. One actor that has repeatedly appeared in recent negotiations is Oman. Muscat has played a key role in mediation, the evacuation framework, and discussions about the future management of the Strait of Hormuz. Why has Oman become so central to this process? And what does it tell us about the country's role in regional diplomacy, especially regarding the Strait?
Yeah, but the other side of the Strait of Hormuz, the southern coast, is Oman's coast. So technically, both in, let's say, international the practice and tradition of how states handle these straits, and also in the current international legal framework, the law of the sea, these states have a certain obligation to keeping traffic flowing freely through the Strait of Hormuz, but straits in general. These straits are essential to international shipping, and freedom of navigation is one of the core elements of our existing international system. Global maritime trade is absolutely critical to the functioning of our modern society. Over 90% of the world's goods in volume by kilometer are being transported by ships at sea. So the global economy doesn't work if maritime trade doesn't work. So we have the law of the sea since the 1980s, 1982 UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which clearly states that coastal states have to ensure the freedom of navigation of vessels passing peacefully, and the straits, as like the Strait of Hormuz, have a very special status in this, because like in Hormuz or in other parts, they are not easy to replace in the flow of traffic. So you have even more of an obligation to make sure traffic can pass through them. And we see the opposite effect now. If one state flouts these obligations and uses control or proximity to such a strait to exert pressure on others, this can have a severe effect on the global economy, on the regional states directly dependent on this, but in fact on all of us here in Europe. I'm in Germany, you're in Germany. We are feeling the effects of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz here directly in the lives of all the people that are consumers, that have to earn their wages in an economy that has to work. So all of this is not just a regional problem, this is a global problem. And both Oman and both Iran have this special obligation under the existing international law to keep maritime trade flowing freely.
During a recent International Maritime Organization press briefing last week, one word came up repeatedly, and that is trust. I mean, shipping routes can reopen within days. Confidence cannot. What is harder to restore after a crisis like this? Freedom of navigation or confidence in freedom of navigation?
Well, it clearly is the confidence which you can see when talking to captains, the masters on these vessels, when talking to shipping companies or to insurance companies. Trust in Iran isn't there yet. So even if, and that is also a lesson learned, so to speak, the hard way over the past weeks and months, that sometimes the civilian government, in parentheses, civilian, the government, official government of Iran negotiates with the United States and comes up with the claim the straits are open. And the very moment that happens, the Revolutionary Guards announce over radio in the Strait of Hormuz and in the region that the strait remains closed, and they are shooting at vessels that try to actually challenge this claim. So, and to this point, to this day, the straits are not fully open. So Iran still claims control. The Revolutionary Guards still want to enforce their own regime of extortion money from international shipping. So masters of vessels are clearly advised to not risk the passage or do so under their own discretion. They are risking the lives of their crew in a system where they might still get shot at.
Over the past weeks, I've spoken to a commercial ship captain who described the psychological pressure on his crew during this crisis as unlike anything they had experienced before. And at the same time, the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization warned that seafarers have gone from the COVID-19 pandemic to the Black Sea, to the Red Sea, now to the Strait of Hormuz, and that shipping should never become collateral damage in geopolitical conflicts. Are we still underestimating the human cost of this crisis?
I think the human cost is tremendous. Lives of sailors have been lost. Vessels have been targeted, not just while passing through the Strait of Hormuz, but also in the Persian Gulf. But I think we have to really emphasize a fundamental point that affects all of us. The peaceful time of international navigation are over. We no longer have a situation where shipping is, let's say, happening in a peaceful, neutral space. It never came for free. Global maritime trade never came for free. We needed a system of maritime power, of global, cooperatively organized maritime power, but driven mainly by the globally present United States Navy to ensure that maritime security was a provided common good for everybody. And since the late 1990s, early 2000s, this became more and more of a shared effort where many states could buy into this system of ensuring maritime security for everybody. So merchant vessels could, keep globalization going and transport all the goods that were driving our global economy. Merchant vessels are not armed these days as they used to be for hundreds of years because there was a global system of sea power in place to protect them, either physically in presence in certain parts when it came to countering piracy, for example, or through a threat scenario where whoever wanted to exploit proximity to critical straits, critical sea routes, that these ambitions could be quickly stifled by international coalitions of sea power. And this is no longer the case. On the one hand, technology has changed the balance. It's much easier now with relatively little effort to challenge even the most powerful navies. We've seen it in the Black Sea with Ukraine, challenging the Russian Navy. We've seen it in the Red Sea, where the Houthi, with their attacks, have been able to thwart the efforts of the United States and also an international coalition with European navies to stop them from attacking shipping. That hasn't succeeded and cost tremendous efforts in resources to stop drone attacks and missile attacks on shipping. And now with the Strait of Hormuz, we're seeing this on an even bigger level, of a higher level, where the state of Iran is able to field hundreds of drones every day, to be able to deploy a combination of swarms of drones with cruise missiles, with ballistic missiles, and also a threat of mines. This is beyond what even the most powerful Navy, the United States Navy, is able to completely stop. there will always be a residual risk for shipping, and therefore the free flow of shipping can no longer work. Peace mode for merchant vessels is over. We will always have this residual threat, and we will have to prepare for a time in which the supply of societies with critical raw materials, with critical goods, be it fertilizer to enable the harvest for the rest of the year, be it oil and gas to keep energy going, to supply the rest of society, keep our economy working, or other critical elements when looking at the Persian Gulf, helium, which is needed in a number of very, very important applications in our societies, not least of all the manufacture of semiconductors, which will have ripple-on effects to be felt for not just months but years to come. So we will have to acknowledge how critically dependent we are on maritime trade, and how little we are able to protect it at this stage, and how much we are we are called upon to become much more resilient to withstand shocks and accept risks, manage them, rather than trying to make them completely go away.
Much of the debate in Europe has focused on oil prices and energy security. But beyond energy, what should European policymakers learn from this crisis about maritime security, critical infrastructure, and global supply chains?
I think first and foremost, the lesson to be learned from this is that the days of peace are over. We've received the big shock and warning sign with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022. We could have read the signs on the wall already in 2014 or even earlier with Vladimir Putin's speech in Munich, or the invasion of Georgia. But clearly, in 2022 onwards, we have woken up to a world in which peace is no longer the norm, and we have to prepare to be able to defend our interests, to be able to deter aggressors from harming us and taking away our freedom and our source of economic subsistence, to put pressure on us across the board of political instruments. And from Ukraine in 2022 to the Red Sea attacks by the Houthis in late 2023 to now the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in 2026, we are getting more and more of these unmistakable signs how closely threatened we are in the core interests of what makes our societies run and what enables our freedom in practice, in day-to-day subsistence. Our political stability depends on people being able to feed themselves at the core essence of things. Of course, as democracies, we are able to organize the types of conflicts which are coming more and more when it comes to distribution of wealth and supplies. But we do not want to be putting ourselves in a position at the mercy, at the hands of external powers, deciding on what we get and what we don't get, and how we are to determine our futures. So this is clearly another perhaps last warning shot before it gets even more threatening to us. So we have to use this not just as a maritime call to action. We have to see this as a call to action across the board to become more resilient and forceful and assertive in our defense.
Looking beyond the current headlines, what has the crisis permanently changed about the maritime security, not only in the Strait of Hormuz, but globally?
Yeah, we all, as humanity, but also, of course, as Europeans, we critically depend on the sea for our subsistence, for our future. Without the sea, without the ocean as an element of our global ecosystem, this planet is not viable as a habitat, but our modern economy, our modern societies are not viable without maritime trade, without resource supplies from the sea. So we need to acknowledge this more and be able to defend these core interests, protect the sea as an ecosystem, protect the sea as a resource base, as a food source, but also as a critical highway of the maritime transport that keeps our societies running. Europe's lights will turn off after a few weeks of no ships arriving in our ports. 80% of our energy supply depends on ships arriving in our ports. And the rest of our industry, of our society, runs on what we get in volume and in regular, reliable volume of trade coming in through our ports and via ships and via the ocean. So we need to invest a lot more into protecting this. We need to build those partnerships that we need. This connects us to the world. We are not an island. We are a peninsula geographically here in the European Union, on this European peninsula, but politically, as humans, we are not an island. We are connected to so many other players on the world stage. We need our traditional allies more and more. We need to rebuild and strengthen the partnerships that we've had, and as is happening currently, to intensify the partnership between Europe and Canada, for example, under the old NATO umbrella, but strengthening this regardless and beyond the NATO ties, but also other partnerships, be it India, be it South Africa, be it Brazil, be it other states in South America or Africa, Australia. All of these players have similar interests, similar goals, and are natural partners of the Europeans, for example. If you look at the Persian Gulf, those are most gravely affected by the closure of the strait are the Gulf states themselves. So we need to be their partners in this hour of need, because we will need them too, because the nights are getting colder and darker out there in international politics for decades to come. So we need to build the strength that we need in order to weather these times of storm, and we need to make sure we're not thinking of ourselves. First and foremost, we need to build the network and the international society that we need in order to withstand these storms.
Dr. Brake, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, Mrs. Herrmann.
This was a new episode of Focus Nahost with Dr. Moritz Brake, Senior Fellow at the Center for Advanced Security, Strategic and Integration Studies at the German University of Bonn, and founder and CEO of Nexmaris. If you found this conversation valuable, feel free to share it, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. It helps ensure that more people can hear these perspectives. You can also read the full transcript of this interview in my Substack newsletter. And if you're interested in the broader geopolitical context behind the Strait of Hormuz, I also recommend my previous conversation with Dr. Hamidreza Azizi about Iran, regional diplomacy, and the future of the Middle East. I'll link the episode in the show notes. My name is Josephine Herrmann. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.